The sky above the desert was not calm that day. A deep roar shook the ground, and a silver ship fell through the clouds, trailing fire. The human soldier, Daniel Cross, was stationed at the border outpost when the strange craft crashed only a few kilometers away. His orders were clear: stay put and wait for command. But Daniel was never good at ignoring someone in trouble. He took a desert rover and raced toward the wreck. The air smelled of burning metal. He expected soldiers or machines, but instead he found her. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen: tall, graceful, skin like emerald silk, and hair the color of bright pink blossoms. Her golden crown was dented, and her eyes held both pride and pain. She was an alien princess, though Daniel did not know her name yet. She was struggling to pull a panel free from the side of the ship. Sparks jumped from broken wires. The princess's hands trembled, but she didn't stop. Daniel stepped forward and caught her attention. Her eyes narrowed, scanning his uniform. For a second, she looked ready to strike. But then she saw something in his face. He was not here to harm her. "I can help," Daniel said, his voice steady. She tilted her head, unsure. The wind tugged at her hair, and the sun lit the gold trim of her dress. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped aside, watching him closely. The ship was advanced, far beyond human designs, but damage was damage. Daniel's fingers worked fast, bypassing the burnt circuits and reconnecting fuel lines. The ground trembled again. In the distance, dust rose. Vehicles were approaching. They were not human. The princess's gaze snapped to the horizon, and her hand went to the hilt of a slender blade at her waist. "They come for me," she said. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of command. Daniel kept working, aware that every second counted. The engines coughed, and a blue light ran across the ship's hull. A shadow passed over them as the enemy ships drew closer. Daniel finished sealing the last panel and stepped back. "It should fly now," he said. She touched the side of the craft, and the ship hummed to life. Then she looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. "You repaired my vessel," she said quietly. "You risked yourself for me." Daniel shrugged. "You looked like you needed help." Her lips curved into the smallest smile. Blaster fire cracked across the sand, forcing them both to duck. The princess grabbed Daniel's arm with surprising strength. "Come with me," she said. "If you stay, they will kill you." Daniel looked at the burning horizon, then at the living green in her eyes. It was not the first time he had faced danger, but this choice was different. The ship's ramp was open, waiting. The sound of the enemy's engines was now deafening. Daniel made his choice and followed her up the ramp. As the hatch sealed, the ship lifted off the ground. Through the small window, he saw the enemy vehicles arrive too late. The desert shrank below them. The princess stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You have done more than repair a ship," she said. "You have changed my fate." Daniel didn't know what that meant, but he knew this was only the beginning. The ship cut through the sky like a silver arrow. Daniel stood near the control deck, feeling the pull of acceleration in his chest. Outside, the desert became a blur of gold and brown, then gave way to dark mountains and deep shadows. The alien princess sat in the pilot's seat, her hands dancing over glowing controls that hummed with strange energy. She moved with practiced precision, but her eyes kept flicking to him as if measuring something more than his presence. Her voice finally broke the silence. "You risked your life. For a stranger, why?" Daniel leaned against the bulkhead, still catching his breath. "Doesn't matter where someone's from. If they're in trouble, I help." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The tension in the air eased, but the hum of the engines carried urgency. The princess turned her attention forward again, adjusting the ship's course toward a line of blue mountains on the horizon. Daniel walked closer to her station, noticing the readouts on her screens. Some were flashing warnings in symbols he couldn't read. "Your ship's still damaged," he said. She didn't deny it. "The repairs you made saved us from capture, but we cannot reach my world yet. We will need a safe place to finish the work." Her words carried an unspoken truth. Danger was still following them. Daniel glanced out the side window and saw faint specks moving in the clouds behind them. The princess tapped a panel, and a map of stars appeared above the console. Her finger traced a path toward a small glowing marker. "There is an abandoned outpost here. It was once under my people's control. It will give us cover." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of being on an alien craft headed into unknown territory. He had been in combat zones before, but nothing compared to the uncertainty of deep space. The princess's voice softened. "I still do not know your name." Daniel straightened. "Daniel Cross, Sergeant, Terran Forces." She repeated his name like tasting something rare. When the ship slipped beyond the edge of the atmosphere, a view outside became a black ocean filled with stars. Daniel had seen space before, but never like this. Here, the stars felt closer, alive as if watching. The princess adjusted the power output, dimming the lights inside the cockpit. Her posture shifted, and for the first time since the crash, she seemed to let go of some of her guardedness. "In my world, acts of kindness are rare," she said. "They are not given without cost." Daniel met her gaze. "I don't ask for payment." Her eyes held his for a long beat before she looked away. A sudden tone from the console broke the quiet. The princess's fingers flew across the controls, pulling up a display. An enemy signal had locked onto them. "They have faster ships," she said. "They will reach us if we continue in a straight line." Daniel stepped closer. "Then, we don't go in a straight line." She turned her head slowly toward him, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You think like a hunter." She banked the craft sharply, and the stars streaked into bright lines outside. The ship dove toward the shadow of a drifting asteroid field. Rocks the size of buildings tumbled slowly in the dark, spinning and glinting under distant starlight. The princess navigated with skill, weaving between massive stone walls and narrow gaps. Daniel gripped the seat beside her, but his trust in her piloting grew with every near miss. The enemy signals on the display began to scatter as their pursuers struggled to follow through the maze. "Almost clear," she whispered, her voice carrying both focus and hope. When the last enemy signal faded from the radar, the princess allowed the ship to slow. Daniel could feel the tension drain from the air. She turned to him, her expression softer than before. "You could have stayed in your outpost. You could have let me be taken." He shook his head. "That's not who I am." She studied him. In the dim cockpit light, and for the first time, her voice carried warmth instead of command. "Then perhaps it is not only my ship you have repaired, Daniel Cross." Her words lingered in the air, carrying a meaning he could not yet name. The asteroid field faded behind them, leaving only the vast black of space and the quiet hum of the ship. Daniel sat in the co-pilot seat now, watching the alien princess work the controls with a steady confidence. Her fingers tapped glowing panels that shifted and changed with each command. She moved like someone who had flown 1,000 missions, but her eyes carried a weight he still could not name. They were headed toward the abandoned outpost she had marked earlier. On the display, it looked small, just a faint blue light among the stars. Daniel leaned forward, scanning the readouts he could understand. "No more signals on our tail," he said. She nodded without looking away from her course. "They will regroup. We must repair the remaining damage before they find us again." Her voice carried a calm urgency, the kind of tone that made people listen. Daniel took a moment to study her. The crown on her head had a small crack from the crash, but it still gleamed in the cabin lights. Her green skin seemed to glow softly in the dim interior. He wondered what her world was like. What kind of people could create ships like this, and crowns that survived explosions? "What's your name?" he asked. She glanced at him briefly. "Aurelia." She spoke it like it was a song, and then returned her focus to the stars ahead. The journey to the outpost took hours. Daniel used the time to check the toolkit he had brought from the desert rover. Most of his tools were crude compared to the ship's technology, but he knew he could make them work. Aurelia occasionally glanced at him as if measuring his worth. Again, though she said nothing. He could tell she was a leader. Every move she made felt deliberate, every silence intentional. Finally, a faint structure appeared ahead, floating against the darkness. "We are here," she said. The outpost looked like a giant ring split into sections, its metal surface scarred from age and impact. Lights no longer shone from its windows. As Aurelia brought the ship closer, Daniel could see the outlines of docking arms and broken panels. "It was abandoned after the war," she explained. "But some systems should still function." The landing was smooth, though the docking clamps groaned in protest. Once the engines powered down, Aurelia stood and took a small silver device from her belt. "This will unlock the inner gates," she said. They stepped into the docking bay, the air cold and dry. Dust floated in the low gravity, stirred by their movement. Aurelia moved ahead with confidence, the device in her hand casting a faint blue light. Daniel followed, scanning the shadows for movement. The walls were lined with crates and equipment covered in frost. "No one's been here in years," he said. "Good," she replied. "It means no one will disturb us while we work." Her words echoed off the metal walls like a quiet promise. In the central chamber, they found the main power console. Aurelia knelt beside it, her long hair brushing the floor as she examined the wiring. Daniel joined her, setting his toolkit. "Down. Your systems are advanced, but damage is damage," he said. She allowed herself a small smile. "Then let us see if you can mend what the galaxy cannot." Together, they began replacing burnt components and sealing ruptured lines. The work was slow, but Daniel noticed how easily they fell into rhythm. It was as if they had been a team far longer than a single day. Hours passed before the console lights flickered to life. The hum of the outpost systems filled the air, steady and warm. Aurelia straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We have power," she said. Daniel felt a spark of satisfaction, both from the success and from the way she looked at him now, no longer as an outsider but as something closer to an ally. She stepped closer, her voice low. "When I asked you to come with me, it was not only to save your life. There is something I must show you, Daniel Cross." Her eyes held his, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of the unknown future pressing toward him. Daniel followed Aurelia through the dim corridors of the outpost. The faint hum of the newly restored power echoed around them. Dust swirled in the low gravity, catching the blue light from her device. She moved with purpose, her steps light but confident. Daniel kept pace, his eyes scanning the shadows for signs of movement. Even with the systems working again, the place felt abandoned in a way that pressed against the skin. They reached a sealed door at the far end of the hall. Aurelia placed her silver device into a slot, and the door slid open with a slow mechanical sigh. Beyond it lay a chamber lined with crystalline panels, each one glowing faintly. At the center stood a raised platform with a control pillar. "This is the heart of the outpost," Aurelia said. "It contains data and resources my people left behind." Daniel stepped inside, drawn by the soft light. The air here was warmer, almost welcoming. Aurelia approached the pillar and placed her hand on it. Lines of light spread outward, running along the floor and walls. The panels brightened, revealing intricate patterns that shimmered like water. "These are records," she explained. "Histories, maps, and messages from before the fall." Daniel walked along the panels, glancing at the alien symbols. He didn't understand them, but he could feel the importance in the way she spoke. "Why show me this?" he asked. She turned her gaze toward him, her green eyes steady. "Because you may be the only one who can help me finish what my people began." Daniel stepped back toward her. "You said your ship was going to your world. Is that where this leads?" She nodded. "My world is under threat. These records contain the key to protecting it. But the enemy will destroy them if they find this place." Her voice was calm, but the edge of urgency was there again. Daniel understood that helping her meant more than just fixing the ship. It meant stepping into a conflict far larger than himself. Aurelia's eyes softened. "You already chose to save me once. I ask you to choose again." They worked together to extract the data from the pillar. Aurelia guided his hands over the unfamiliar controls, and Daniel quickly adapted, matching her instructions with mechanical precision. The crystalline panels projected maps of star systems, highlighting paths and coordinates he could barely follow. Symbols shifted into different patterns, some glowing brighter than others. Aurelia spoke quietly, explaining which sections mattered most. Her focus never wavered, but Daniel could sense she was aware of every move he made. When the last sequence completed, a small compartment opened in the pillar. Inside lay a metallic sphere, etched with tiny runes. Aurelia lifted it carefully, holding it as if it were fragile glass. "This is the core archive," she said. "With this, my people can defend themselves." Daniel glanced toward the door. "Then we need to get it back to your world." She gave a single nod. "Yes, but the journey will not be simple." Her fingers tightened slightly around the sphere before she placed it into a pouch at her side. They returned to the docking bay, the outpost now humming quietly under its restored power. Daniel felt the weight of what they carried, both in the literal sense and in the responsibility it brought. He had been a soldier long enough to know when a mission would change the course of more than just a single life. Aurelia walked beside him, silent for a while. Then she said, "When I first saw you in the desert, I did not expect you to follow me. Now I cannot imagine completing this without you." As the ship powered up again, the controls glowed in familiar patterns. Daniel took the co-pilot's seat without being asked. The engine's deep hum filled the cabin, and the docking clamps released. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, and somewhere among them lay Aurelia's homeworld. Daniel glanced at her, noting the calm determination in her posture. She met his gaze for a moment, then looked forward. "Hold on, Daniel Cross," she said. "The next part of our journey will test us both." The ship angled toward the dark expanse, and the outpost faded into the distance. The ship moved through space at a steady pace, its engines a low and constant rumble. Daniel sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching the stars slip past. The air inside the cabin carried the faint scent of metal and something floral from Aurelia's robes. She was focused on the navigation display, adjusting their course toward a cluster of glowing stars. The metallic sphere containing the archive was secured in a compartment between them, a silent reminder of their mission. Hours passed without a word. Then Aurelia broke the silence. "We will reach a refueling station soon. It is neutral territory, but not without dangers." Daniel nodded, his mind already preparing for trouble. "What kind of dangers?" She glanced at him briefly. "Spies, mercenaries, and those who sell information to the highest bidder. We must not draw attention." Her calm voice carried a warning he understood well. This was the kind of place where one wrong move could end a mission. The station came into view like a giant metal flower unfolding in the dark. Its docking arms stretched outward, and bright lights glowed along its edges. Smaller ships drifted in and out, each one disappearing into the main structure. Aurelia guided their vessel toward a vacant berth, her hands steady on the controls. Daniel kept scanning the station for threats, noting the mix of different alien designs. This was clearly a crossroads for many worlds, and not all of them friendly. Once docked, Aurelia stood and secured her crown under a hooded cloak. "Stay close," she said. Daniel followed her into the airlock, wearing a plain jacket to hide his uniform. The station's corridors were crowded, filled with traders, travelers, and armed guards from various factions. Voices in dozens of languages mixed in the air. Aurelia moved with quiet confidence, avoiding eye contact but never losing awareness of her surroundings. Daniel mirrored her movements, scanning the faces around them for signs of danger. They reached a small supply terminal operated by a squat alien with 4 eyes and a pale, leathery face. Aurelia exchanged a few words in a language Daniel didn't understand, and the merchant began preparing fuel cells. Daniel kept watch, his attention caught by a group of armored figures across the corridor. Their eyes were fixed on the two of them, and their body language told him they were not casual observers. He leaned closer to Aurelia. "We've got company," he said quietly. Aurelia didn't turn her head, but he saw her hand slip beneath her cloak toward the hilt of her blade. "Can you get the fuel quickly?" Daniel asked. She gave the faintest nod. The merchant returned with 2 heavy cells, and Daniel paid in local currency from a pouch he handed him. The figures across the way began moving closer, their steps slow but deliberate. Daniel shifted his stance slightly, ready for whatever came next. Aurelia's eyes met his for a split second, and he knew she was ready too. The first of the armored figures stepped into their path. His voice was deep and accented. "The crown," he said, pointing to the faint glint under Aurelia's hood. Daniel moved between them, his voice cold. "Not yours." The man's companions spread out, blocking the corridor behind them. Passers-by glanced their way but quickly moved on, unwilling to get involved. Aurelia stepped to Daniel's side, her blade flashing in the station's artificial light. "Move," she said, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. The leader hesitated, clearly weighing the risk. His eyes moved from Aurelia's weapon to Daniel's steady stance. Finally, with a frustrated growl, he motioned for his group to step aside. Daniel didn't lower his guard until they had vanished into the crowd. Aurelia replaced her blade under her cloak and resumed walking. "They will report us," she said. Daniel nodded. "Then we'd better move fast." They reached the docking bay without further trouble, the fuel cells secured in the ship's hold. As they lifted off from the station, Daniel looked at Aurelia. "They were after you. Not just the sphere." She met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, my crown marks me as the last heir of my house. To some, that makes me a symbol worth saving. To others, it makes me a prize to claim." Daniel understood more than she realized. Protecting her would not just be about the mission. It would mean standing against anyone who saw her as a trophy. The stars ahead seemed colder now, but his resolve burned hotter than ever. The ship moved deeper into uncharted territory, the stars ahead shining like distant beacons. Daniel sat at the co-pilot station, checking the systems as Aurelia plotted their next jump. The refueling station was far behind them now, but the encounter there had left him uneasy. He knew the men who confronted them would not simply give up. Aurelia's focus never wavered from the display. Yet he could sense she was thinking the same thing. "We will have to take a longer route," she said finally. "It will keep us off the main lanes, but it may cost us time." Daniel studied the star map. The detour took them near asteroid belts and ion storms. "Dangerous," he said. Aurelia looked at him and gave a faint smile. "Everything worth doing is." Her words carried both confidence and a strange warmth that made Daniel realize how much trust she had already placed in him. As the ship entered the first stretch of the detour, Daniel noticed a faint flicker on the radar. "We're being scanned," he said. Aurelia's eyes narrowed as she adjusted the sensors. "Not a patrol, pirates." She shifted the ship into a faster course, the hum of the engines rising in pitch. The radar showed 2 smaller vessels gaining on them. "They'll try to disable our engines," she said. Daniel was already checking the defensive systems. Then we make sure they can't. The pirate ships closed in quickly, firing bursts of energy that crackled against the shields. Daniel took control of the rear cannons, his hands steady as he returned fire. One of the pursuing ships veered off, but the others stayed locked on them. Aurelia wove the ship through debris and rock formations, using every bit of cover the terrain offered. "Hold them for 30 more seconds," she said. Daniel gritted his teeth, tracking their movements through the targeting display. With a sharp maneuver, Aurelia dove the ship into the shadow of a massive asteroid. Daniel fired a concentrated burst at the enemy's starboard wing. The impact flared bright against the darkness, sending the pirate ship spinning away. "They'll think twice before following," he said. Aurelia allowed the engines to ease, but her expression stayed alert. "We cannot linger. There will be others." Her voice was steady, but Daniel caught the edge of tension beneath it. Once the danger had passed, they took a moment to check the archives compartment. The metallic sphere was still secured, untouched by the battle. Aurelia reached out and rested her hand on it. "If this is lost, my world will fall," she said quietly. Daniel understood the gravity in her tone. "Then we make sure it gets there," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, as if searching for something unspoken, then nodded once. The next hours were quieter. Daniel worked on reinforcing some of the systems damaged in the skirmish. Aurelia sat nearby, occasionally, offering tools or making adjustments. They moved in a rhythm that required few words. For Daniel, it felt strangely natural, as though they had been partners for much longer than the few days since they met. At one point, she broke the silence. "You are not like the others I have met from your kind," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And that's good?" She smiled faintly. "It is why I asked you to come with me." As they neared the edge of the detour route, Aurelia began preparing the jump to her home system. The coordinates glowed on the display, a string of numbers and symbols Daniel couldn't interpret. "Once we make this jump, we will be within reach of my world," she said. "But it also means our enemies will be closer than ever." Daniel tightened the straps on his seat. "Then let's be ready." Her hand hovered over the jump control, and for a brief second, their eyes met. The ship leapt forward as the jump drive activated, the stars stretching into lines of light. Daniel felt the familiar pull in his chest, but this time it was mixed with the weight of what awaited them on the other side. Aurelia kept her gaze forward, the glow of the instruments reflecting in her eyes. When the stars returned to pinpoints, a blue-green planet filled the view ahead, its oceans and continents shining under a golden sun. Aurelia's voice was soft, but carried pride. "Welcome to my home, Daniel Cross." The blue-green planet grew larger in the viewport, its swirling clouds casting shadows over vast oceans and sprawling continents. Daniel had seen beautiful worlds before, but this one felt different. There was a quiet dignity to it, as though it carried centuries of history within its landscapes. Aurelia guided the ship into the upper atmosphere, her hands steady on the controls. The hull vibrated softly as they descended through thin, pale clouds. Below them, green valleys stretched between silver mountain ranges. Rivers glittered under the sun, winding toward cities that shone with elegant towers and curved bridges. Daniel leaned closer to the glass, taking in the sight. "It's incredible," he said. Aurelia's expression softened, but her voice remained steady. "It is my home, and it is in danger." Her tone reminded him that this journey was not over. Not even close. The ship approached a grand city built along the shore of a wide bay. Golden spires rose from its center, surrounded by clusters of smaller domes and tall crystalline walls. Aurelia angled the craft toward a landing platform extending from one of the towers. "We will meet with the council first," she said. "They must see the archive and hear what you have done." Daniel adjusted his jacket and checked his sidearm, unsure of how her people would react to him. They landed smoothly, the platform's surface gleaming under the sunlight. A group of armored guards stood waiting, their armor engraved with patterns that caught the light. As Aurelia stepped down the ramp, the guards saluted, then looked toward Daniel with measured curiosity. He followed her closely, feeling the weight of their stares. None spoke, but their eyes tracked his every movement. Aurelia led the way into the tower's high arched entrance. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the scent of something like fresh rain. The hall was lined with columns carved from pale stone, each one inlaid with silver designs. Aurelia moved toward a set of tall doors at the far end. They opened as she approached, revealing a circular chamber with a high dome. Around the room sat members of the council elders dressed in flowing robes, their eyes sharp and unreadable. In the center stood a pedestal, clearly meant for the archive. Aurelia stepped forward and placed the metallic sphere onto the pedestal. A soft glow spread from its surface, lighting the chamber with a gentle pulse. "The archive is recovered," she announced. Murmurs ran through the council, their tones a mixture of relief and surprise. One elder, taller than the rest, leaned forward. "And who is this with you?" His voice carried the weight of authority. Aurelia glanced at Daniel before answering. "This is Daniel Cross. Without him, both I and the archive would have been lost." The council regarded Daniel in silence for several moments. Then the elder spoke again. "A human aiding our princess? This is unusual." Daniel kept his gaze steady. "I was in the right place at the right time," he said simply. Aurelia's lips curved faintly, as if she appreciated his humility. Another council member leaned in. "You have brought the archive, but the enemy will not stop. They will come here, to our gates." Aurelia's voice hardened. "Then we prepare. With the knowledge in this sphere, we can." As the meeting continued, Daniel listened carefully. The archive contained tactical records, star maps, and defense plans from a time before Aurelia's people had been weakened by war. With it, they could anticipate enemy movements and rebuild their defenses. But the elders debated the risks of acting too soon, fearing that an open display of strength would draw immediate attack. Daniel finally spoke. "If you wait too long, they'll decide when the fight begins, and you'll be forced to defend on their terms." The chamber fell silent at his words. Aurelia looked at him, then turned back to the council. "He is right. We cannot afford hesitation. We have a chance to act now, before they regroup." Her voice carried the kind of certainty that made others listen. One by one, the elders nodded in agreement. The tall elder spoke again. "Very well, the council will authorize preparations. But the task will be dangerous, and Daniel Cross, you will be part of it." Daniel met Aurelia's gaze, and in that moment, they both knew the path ahead would test them more than anything so far. Asterisk preparations began the moment the council's decision was made. Daniel found himself working alongside Aurelia's finest warriors, learning the layout of the city's defenses. The crystalline walls were reinforced with energy shields, while the golden spires held concealed weapons that could fire on ships. In the upper atmosphere, Aurelia moved among her people with authority, but she often returned to Daniel's side, asking for his perspective on tactics. Her trust in him had grown into something unspoken, yet undeniable. Days passed quickly as the city transformed into a fortress. Workers repaired old defense lines, and patrols doubled in number. Daniel assisted in training squads on rapid response drills, using strategies from his own military experience. Aurelia watched from the training grounds, her expression unreadable. When the sessions ended, she would quietly offer suggestions, her insights proving both sharp and practical. Together, they blended human and alien tactics into a unified defense plan. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, Daniel stood on a balcony overlooking the bay. The water reflected the golden light, and ships moved in and out of the harbor. Aurelia joined him, the wind stirring her hair. The council fears the attack will come within days, she said. Daniel nodded. Then we'll be ready. She studied him for a moment. You could leave, Daniel Cross. Take a ship and disappear before the danger comes. He shook his head, his voice firm. Not my style. The attack came sooner than expected. Alarms rang across the city as enemy ships broke through the outer defenses. Energy blasts lit the sky, striking the shields around the walls. Daniel ran to the command center with Aurelia at his side. From the balcony, they could see dark shapes descending toward the landing platforms. They're going for the gates, Daniel said. Aurelia's voice was sharp. Then we stopped them there. Orders were relayed, and the city's defenders moved to intercept. Fighting erupted in the streets as enemy troops breached the lower gates. Daniel led a squad through the narrow alleys, using the city's layout to cut off advancing forces. Aurelia moved with precision, her blade flashing in the light. The defenders held their ground, forcing the attackers back toward the gates. Overhead, the golden spires unleashed energy bursts that tore through enemy ships. The sound of battle echoed across the city like a storm rolling through stone canyons. At the height of the chaos, Daniel saw a squad of enemy soldiers break away, heading toward the council tower. He signaled to Aurelia, and together they raced through the crowded streets. The metallic sphere, the archive, was inside that tower, and if the enemy reached it, all would be lost. They arrived just as the attackers breached the entrance. Daniel charged forward, his rifle cutting through the first wave. Aurelia moved beside him, every strike of her blade precise and final. The battle in the tower's hall was fast and brutal. Daniel fought with the practiced focus of a soldier who had survived countless fights. Aurelia's movements were a blur of green and gold, her presence commanding the room. When the last enemy fell, the hall was silent except for their breathing. Daniel checked the archive's compartment. It was untouched. Aurelia stepped to his side, her voice steady. The heart of my people is safe. Because of you. Outside, the defenders finally drove the enemy from the city. Ships fled into the sky, chased by bursts of defensive fire. The council gathered in the main square, their robes marked with ash and dust. Aurelia addressed them, her voice carrying across the crowd. This day we stood together, and we prevailed. She turned toward Daniel, her expression softening. And we did so with the help of one who was not of our world, yet fought as if it were his own. That night, the city celebrated its survival. Lanterns floated into the sky, their warm light drifting above the bay. Daniel stood beside Aurelia on the same balcony where they had spoken days earlier. She looked at him, her green eyes bright in the glow. You repaired my ship, she said softly. But you also repaired my faith in what can be between our peoples. Will you stay, Daniel Cross? He met her gaze, and for the first time, allowed himself a small smile. If you'll have me. She reached for his hand, and in that quiet moment, the choice was no longer just his, it was theirs.